I'm Alex Pavljuk. Welcome to Maybe Actually Museums Are For Me. During the opening weekend of Interwoven Power, Native Knowledge, Native Art, the new landmark exhibition here at MAM, which reimagined the museum's presentation of our Native American arts collection, I had the chance to sit down with one of the exhibiting artists on view in the show, Eric-Paul Riege, who's a remarkable fiber and performance artist who is no stranger to the museum. He's performed here a few years back. He was in town for a few days during the duration of the opening of this show, so it was such a privilege to get to know him a little bit prior to the conversation you're about to hear. But before chatting with the microphones rolling, we talked about his process, the philosophy and practices behind his large-scale works that he's described as totems of memory. Visually, because obviously this is an audio podcast, the best way to picture what these totems of memory are is by thinking of them like large floating earrings that gods would be, wearing. They float from the ceiling, like I said, and they sway as museum goers pass them by, or more directly when Eric-Paul Riege himself pushes, hits, or swings them during his multi-hour performances he calls activations. Now, I'm going to keep this brief because there is certainly a lot of conversation to get to, but I think an interesting and important thing to keep in mind is the role that performative art and other abstract visual mediums and modalities of art play into the diversity of works and experiences within a museum. We end up speaking to this directly, but like I've talked about in previous episodes, my first proper museum experience of note was the MoMA, and during that trip in high school, I was exposed to performative art. It was like jumping right into the deep end, but I think that early and immediate exposure helped broaden my understanding of what is meant to be and more directly can be considered and viewed as art. Eric-Paul Riege said to me that performance is personal and vulnerable for both the artist and the viewer, and that really struck me. I think that forces the observer, like me on my first expedition to, a museum, to think more broadly and widen my expectations and assumptions about what art is. Eric-Paul Riege and I ended up speaking just moments after his second and final performance at MAM during the opening weekend. The performance came in at just about 2 hours, and, our conversation started as soon as he entered the room. Here is that conversation.
And then you want to give that back. It's a mutual gift. But I had a conversation with Jeffrey Gibson one time, and he said something really nice. He was like, I have seen you perform before, and I feel like you would do the same thing if you were performing for yourself, for one person, for 100 people, for 1,000 people, that you would still put that same amount of energy and dance. Yeah. And I think that's true. Earlier when we were in the hallway and you asked if it's going to be the same, it's different, I always think of it as a dance partner. So the work is one dance partner and I'm the other dance partner. And sometimes when you're in the club or something dancing with someone, sometimes this person you dance really well with, sometimes this person dances different with you. Maybe it's a little bit more awkward. And that's how every performance is, because the work is always different. And performance to performance today was a little bit different. Sometimes you just bump into the piece a certain way and it makes a certain noise or does something interesting. And then that motion just gets repeated and repeated. I feel like it's telling me.
Yeah, there was that towards the end of the performance when you were on the floor and you were going back and forth. For an audience that can't see me. Also, I should probably introduce us. Hi, I'm Alex Pavljuk. I'm the digital content strategist at the Montclair Art Museum. Welcome back to Maybe Actually Museums Are For Me. I'm sat here with a remarkable fiber and performance artist, Eric-Paul Riege, who just actually wrapped up a performance in the exhibition Interwoven Power, Native Knowledge, Native Art. Do you want to take a second and introduce yourself?
Yeah. Just finished dancing with the work, which was really nice. But I feel good. My name's Eric-Paul Riege. Yat Eshe, Eric-Paul Riege Nishia. I am Diné from northwestern New Mexico in a border town called Gallup, New Mexico. Not Najoja Ayasin Nisha, surrounded by Navajo Res. Born and raised there and still work there. My studio is right next to where my family lives, and that duplex is right next to where the house that I grew up in is. It's all boarded up now, so like the past 27 years of my life, 26 years of my life, I've lived in the same corner block of my town. So my not only are my physical roots deep there in that corner, but ancestral roots. I come from the Charcoal Streak division of the Red Running Into the Water clan, Nanastegi Tachitni. My father is Bilagana, which just means white. My mother's father was Kia'ani, the Towering House clan, and my dad's dad was also white. But I grew up around all my cousins and my aunties and my aunties' aunties and my grandmas, who are all creative in their own right and all work with fiber in different ways. And so I've always said that my hands knew what they were doing before my mind did, and has allowed me to now bring my family to the other side of the country. We're going to the city tomorrow, and it's going to be my mother and my brother's first time.
Really?
Yeah, seeing this part of the country, and yeah, we're gonna have some fun.
Yeah, no, it's great. I was hoping you were gonna say that quote again, because you said it the other night at the press opening that we had, and I've been thinking about that a lot recently. I thought about it a lot watching you perform yesterday, and then of course I was there for the duration of it today, and you know, it is interesting. We were kind of referenced it before, but I asked you in the hallway when we bumped into each other today if you go into these with any sort of routine or choreography, and I'm sure there is some certainly thought that goes into it, but
yeah,
that notion of improving and just feeling it out in the moment. You know, I saw subtle differences. I saw what kind of headspace do you have to get into to do these dances, make this performance happen?
Yeah, it's changed over time as I've gotten older. I had an amazing mentor, Suhan Ho, who's a artist and activist and performance artist. And so when I took my first class with her at UNM in Albuquerque, did lots of different performance exercises, and I was really stringent when I first started performing on meditation and fasting and
oh wow,
like fasting for like 24 hours.
Really?
And
okay.
Not giving into any vices for a while.
Yeah.
But as I've gotten older, I've learned to listen to my body a little bit more, where now if I need a break, I'll take a break during a long performance, or in the morning, if I'm hungry before performance, I'm going to eat now instead of, putting my body through the ringer a little bit. But I feel like there's having both of these things as an experience in preparing for a performance. I really just think your body is telling you what it needs.
Yeah.
And so before, when I was younger, that's what it needed, and that's what it took for me to, slow down. It's a form of, meditation and even exercise.
Yeah.
So sometimes those first 10, 20 minutes of it are the most difficult, because it's you're doing something that's you're changing the way you're breathing, you're changing the way you're thinking, you're becoming more aware of your actions. So in slowing down, sometimes you realize even when you're going slow, you're still going really fast.
Yeah, it seems like there's definitely like a discipline that comes with it.
Yeah. And now that I've done it for so long, it's easier to jump into it. Whereas before, it took me longer to get into that headspace. Now, sometimes I can just kind of start and immediately switch it on. And it's not like, it's a performance, as we all perform, even our own identity. Sometimes
absolutely.
It's easy to
absolutely.
turn it on and off. And it has gotten a little bit easier to turn it on and turn it off as well. Before, after performing, sometimes I was like a shell of a person. And I was like skin and bone, and like I had like, I don't know, gave so much that I was like emotionally empty for like a while, or would get really sad or depressed. It's easier to to finish and kind of step back into day-to-day life.
Can you contextualize it for me a little bit? Obviously, like, we've chatted a lot, outside of the performance. I've watched you perform. It does seem like there is a difference between the personality that I've gotten to know a little bit and the persona that is performing. And I guess, like, talk to me about whatever that, I hesitate to call them a character, but like, what are they?
Yeah, totally. And I don't know if I even have a exact answer, because I wonder the same thing too. I'm like, is it an alter ego? Is it just a facet of myself that I channel through performing and persona, that maybe it's harder for me? Maybe the confidence level that I have when I perform allows me to be more confident in my day-to-day skin. I have a figure in my work. His name is Helon. He started as a son. So I said that I gave birth from my mind, and it became this figure that I would pass down what was being passed down to me, because sometimes I felt like it was too much for my own body and brain to handle, that I was like, so much is gifted to me. I not only need to gift it back in a way, but like now I have this figure in my work that I can kind of gift these things to. And now I see this figure as a collaborator, a friend, also a son, maybe a version of myself that holds on to some of these things. Holant and Diné is the fourth person term to mean exist. Mm-hmm. So like Holant means like I am or I have. But Holant itself means something just to exist. And so in a lot of ways his existence is me thanking for the fact that I exist. And so I've also thought sometimes I'm like, is it a form of drag? Like getting into masks and costume and regalia. And makeup sometimes. I'm like, I don't know if it is necessarily, and possibly it is. RuPaul says just you're born naked and the rest is drag.
Good way of putting it. Yeah. That's a really good way of putting it.
You dress for the job you want, and you dress for what you want to represent. And so, it's also, in the adornment of the body. In my work in general, adornment is this celebration of why we adorn ourselves as Indigenous, particularly me being Diné, as Diné folk. It's for our holy people to watch over us and recognize us and to protect us. And so these pieces of jewelry or these shawls or these other ceremonial objects that we, put on our body and then also use and dance with our form of communicating with not only our, relatives and family that are here with us, but the ones that are behind us and maybe the ones that come before us later on in life. It's all a dance together.
That's really beautiful, especially like watching the performance today and getting to know some of your work, seeing the physical work. It's large. It's really like, it's the first thing, at least that I see when I walk in the room. We talked when we first met, the first thing I said to you is like, I want to like sandwich myself in between the two earrings. Like it's very cozy, it's very welcoming, it's very warm. You mentioned that you can't necessarily like hang these works that are designed to be hung in your home studio. Mm-hmm. What is it like creating these? How did you start developing these large scale floating pieces that like, how does this come to be when you can't even necessarily like test it out
exactly. There is really no testing sometimes. Some parts, like sometimes there's sections that get tested, but for I would say the majority of my work, the first time I'm seeing it all assembled together, hung in a space, is the same time that the museum and the curators and the install team were all holding hands trying to do it together. And luckily, when you have that much faith in your process and your work, when you believe in it, it really does come true a lot of times that it's going to work out. But that whole like visual language and scale came when I was younger, when I was a student, and the projects that I would do, I would work in fiber, and I would
Did you study art?
Yeah, I studied studio art in ecology at UNM.
In ecology, interesting.
Yeah, it's a really cool program that they have there. So when I was working with just different fiber materials, did project for a certain class, and another class I would disassemble that one and reassemble it. So things just started to grow out of one. I had a dorm room and I wanted to make big work, but I just kept reusing the same material and objects. And now I see that as like a form of beading, where I make beads, and then the beads just grow over time. I felt like the scale for me, particularly with this series that that's in the show, my earring series, they're titled Jogcloth for Yaitso. So not only are they in reference to one of our deities, or a number of deities, yeis, that are gods, monsters that roamed before we came. And so, as earlier when I said the reason why we adorn our bodies is for our holy people to recognize us, I'm like, well, if they recognize us by our jewelry, I'm sure they made the same jewelry. And so in some ways, the work is this like type of fantasy story of imagining giant gods and monsters wandering the earth before us that are wearing big earrings. Developing over time different projects, I kept that same sensibility of unmaking and making. Actually, when I was here the last time in 2021, I worked with the student group at the time, and we did a project where I invited all the students to bring in painting, drawing, sculpture, and in the course of the hour or two that we were here, to unmake it and then remake it, and how maybe playing with medium itself, turning something that's 2D into 3D or 3D into 2D. You learn so much about what material itself, what it wants to do. I always feel the best way to learn about how something is made is find it already made and then take it apart. That kind of just is a continual part of my practice of when things are being, there's an assembly line, so I'm making 100 beads, and there's sometimes I use 80, so there's 20 left over. And then in the next project, those 20 become a part of a different thing. And then it becomes a part of an exhibition, and then when that exhibition's over, it might get sent back to me, and then now I have all these beads again to, cut the string of a necklace, and all the beads fall off. It's the same thing with my work. Cut the string of the net earring, all the beads fall off. And now kind of also giving the beads the agency to play what they want to become.
Yeah, I think for context for you, the idea of this podcast was born out of the idea that, museums are often perceived as something that's really intimidating for people, inaccessible for people, whether that's through the idea of it being elitist or out of touch or inaccessible.
Yeah.
And trying to demystify that and redirect that focus and, provide a resource for people who may not be super familiar with museums, maybe are curious but not necessarily, ready to go explore, or, it's about, democratizing, I think, a little bit. And it's not just MAM, it's any institution, any, museum. Each of these episodes, we try to raise a question. Obviously, there's a lot of conversation here and a lot of, just back and forth that isn't necessarily question-based, and that's totally fine. But I think if I had to raise one question for somebody who's unfamiliar with museums, I know for me, my first museum that I ever walked into was MoMA, Museum of Modern Art, and there was a lot of performance happening. And for somebody who had never been to an art museum, really up until that point, maybe once or twice as a little kid, maybe like in Philadelphia, there's the Franklin Institute, which is like a science museum. I'm sure I'd been to like the State Museum in Trenton at one point in time as a little kid, trying to bridge seeing Monet's and then also seeing this very in-your-face performative work. Both have a place in institutions. And I guess, as a performance artist yourself, where do you think that, why it fits in so well and why people should go out of their way to see it and experience it, or how people should, today, for example, people walk in and out and people aren't necessarily watching the entire thing, and you're only catching, bits and pieces. It's like, when certain places have video exhibitions, and it's like, you're not going to catch the entire thing if you're just walking through a gallery. You have to take those moments, and people are going to take away what they will. How do you think that, maybe I'm just going on and rambling a little bit. As a performance artist yourself, how do you think newcomers to a museum who might not be ready to, or not be, prepped to walk into something like your work, can you explain to somebody why it fits in and why it's important?
I saw this funny video on YouTube a long time ago where it was like something about performance art, and the narrator was like, you go into a contemporary art museum and oh no, you walk around the corner and there's a performance art piece happening. It's like, oh gosh, let's see how dense this is. But I feel like performance in a way is for me really vulnerable for both the performer and the audience, because I feel like like we were just talking about getting ready for a performance in the headspace and doing exercises. I also feel that some of the best performance is one where the product and the practice are kind of living as one, and they're like married to each other. While maybe rehearsal is important for a lot of performance artists, for me, I always feel like there's something very exciting about having the possibility of not something going wrong necessarily, but like there's an intimacy of seeing someone's body move in front of you in possibly a strange way in a dance, making both you uncomfortable because of our proximity to one another. But I feel like when you, or at least for me, when I enter a museum, it's always important to feel, challenged by what you're seeing and to learn. I understand why a lot of people don't like contemporary or modern art, because it's challenging and maybe they don't want to dig deeper for the answer. I could do that. And I'm like, well, the context of you not doing it, you not thinking, you not having the experience of this artist and their life and why they chose to do that is all, vital to why this is in front of you.
Exactly. Yes,
happening in front of you. And so, I really do like feel that having performance as a part of a newcomer to museum or institutions of the like kind of both keeps it like challenging, but then also it's, like I said, vulnerable. Brings us down to the human level of like, oh, the people behind these objects are right here in front of you. And so for me personally, when I perform, I feel in dancing and beating on the work and carrying it for long periods of time, or doing the same action over and over, is not only a celebration of the piece itself and showing like what the possibilities of what it can be and change into, but then also going back to my roots as a fiber artist and a weaver, and the meticulous, slow growth of weaving and all of the steps that go into making a rug. It's a exercise in patience to be a weaver, and so I feel like my performances are showing these exercises, or not exercises, these parts of weaving that a lot of people don't see behind the scenes, and that it is hours upon hours upon hours of work to create a weaving object that's, only maybe 3 feet by 4 feet or something around that scale. So I think I also rambled a little bit. No,
you're perfect. You're allowed to ramble. I'm the one that I need to be tight. Can you talk to me a little bit? We mentioned it very briefly, but you were a part of a show called Color Riot.
I wasn't a part of the show.
You performed. Yes.
So I was here at the museum, and then I got invited by Laura Allen, the curator of this show, and then Larissa Nez, who was doing this kind of project with Color Riot.
Yes.
It was I can't remember who the original curator was, but it began at the Heard Museum in Arizona, in Phoenix. Mm-hmm. And then when it was here, I believe that it was his last iteration. And so I was invited along with Venancio Erigon, who is an amazing weaver. We have the exact opposite color palette. He has the expanded rainbow aesthetic. Mm-hmm. So his weavings, like hundreds of dyes and colors. And I use black, white, and in between. Beige and brown. But we were invited to do a talk and see the collection and the archive of the baskets, mainly the baskets that they have here. And then I did a performance. And so with that performance, I brought my dance partner, so the objects to perform with. And then they got remade into the piece that's in the show.
Yes. Yeah, I think that's what's really great is I was not on staff when that performance happened, and so I've only heard about it in passing. And I know one of the security guards was really excited to see, because she recalls you running around the galleries and stuff, and she was like, "I'm so excited." She's like, "I loved it." She's like, "It was so fun."
I ran around that time. I ran around everywhere. This time I sat more still.
A little bit.
But again, I like playing with both. Like,
In the performance this week, there was one moment we were talking at the very beginning about kind of the sounds and stuff that you like, kind of like feeling something out in the moment and being directed and pivoting. And there was one part of the very end when I was doing the motion before.
Yeah.
And obviously no one could see me doing the motion, but you could see me doing the motion.
It's like you're holding two tennis rackets and hitting.
That's a great way to describe it. Yes.
The tennis ball is coming at you.
And they were, the clanging was rattling around so nicely in my brain where like it was just like scratching the right itch. And I was like, why is this familiar? What does this sound like? And to go through the entire album would be silly and try and figure out which song it is. I'm sure I'll do it on my drive home today and listen to the whole thing.
Yeah.
But for some reason, the album 22 a Million by Bon Iver stuck out to me. And there was a rhythm to that was really similar to one of the songs on that album.
Yeah.
And I just couldn't stop thinking about it. And I could hear it in my head with that. And I wonder, do you ever have, besides what's going on in your head to keep you in that headspace, are you thinking about music ever?
Yeah, totally. I feel like I am a very musical person that doesn't play musical instruments. I said before, with Hollande, the figure that I was speaking about, when I had a show at the Hammer Museum, I called it Hollande's Lullaby. And I started thinking about these earrings as a part musical instruments because they all make different sounds. Some of them are adorned with more beads and jingles where when you bump into them, they're a little bit louder. Whereas here, I added the jingles on later. They were on me, and then I was handling them, and then they became a part of the piece at the end, and in both of the performances. And now it's going to be a permanent part of the piece. Yeah. But I with Hollande's Lullaby, I wanted to think of a song that I could possibly create with only the objects that I make. And so I did this sound piece that recorded me banging on the certain earring, and then layered it with me, banging on this other earring, or picking up an object and throwing it out on the ground, or with the jingles, banging them on the ground. And I layered them together to create some sort of song that I called as Lullaby. And yeah, I started thinking them like today, when I was banging on the piece, I would kind of thought about it like, I feel like I'm playing a harp right now, finding a certain sound that I like or a certain motion and just repeating it. And then maybe when I lose that rhythm, or if there's a mistake, if I'm passing the pieces back and forth and I drop it, finding something new then to pick up and keep going. It's a good way to breathe with, and doing breathing exercises while you're doing that.
I asked this question, I've asked this to two artists now. When I first started at the museum, we had the chance to interview Vanessa German, who does sculpture work, and it's very large, there's a lot of recycled material. And I also asked it to Brendan Lazor, who designed the lacrosse stick on view in Interwoven Power. And both were, both artists, especially, in specifically with the large scale sculpture work and the very detailed work that Brandon did on the lacrosse stick. There's a lot of labor and love that go into art. And, it's no different with your work. It's huge. It's detailed. It's thoughtful. It's not hung when it's like the way it's shown is not the way that you're creating it. And I guess the question that I asked them, and I'm going to ask you now, is obviously like there's a mindset and a perception and a conceptualization of what the artwork is to you when it's with you in the studio and it's in progress. And then you send it off. You send it off to wherever it's going to go, and obviously you perform with it and you'll get to see it again, but that next time you see it, it has to feel different. It has to obviously, like, you're seeing it hung for the first time. What does it feel like to revisit works of yours after they've left your studio and left your, I guess the editorial phase? Obviously with your work, you're still editing it while it's here. Today you added, a permanent, addition to the work, but what is that like revisiting after the fact?
It's again, So Suhan, I adore her, and I remember one time helping her out with a de-installation of one of her pieces. So I almost had the opposite experience with her. So it was at the UNM Art Museum. It was a staff show, and she had a piece called Shelter in Place. Her family's from Taiwan, and they had these sandbags that she had stacked in to almost look like it was in the corner of the room, but they were made out of all these really beautiful fabrics and super, super, super colorful, and of course filled with sand. So she had the exhibition, and then she performed, and then me and her and another student de-installed, and so we emptied all the sand and brought it back to her home, and she had it in like a big cylinder bucket. And she said, it's funny how humble art can be sometimes, where, you know, and 2 hours, 3 hours before, it was in a museum white wall space. A few days before, it was being seen by people from around the world and photographed. And then now in this moment, we're rolling the fiber and putting it in this big cylindrical bucket. And when she said that, how humble art can be.
Yeah.
I think that in so many ways, in what I was wearing today, and performing with.
I was gonna say, how do you travel with that?
When I went down to the bathroom, it fell in the sink, and the sink turned on, and it got.
Oh my gosh!
So art can be very humble, and I feel like with that experience, I always try to keep that in mind when going into a space where I sent the work off to, and we're at a fancy museum, and there's, you know, guys on lifts hanging up from the ceiling. I'm like, this material, not only, you know, working with it in my studio, but I'm like, there's a history of like, possibly I used some yarn that was gifted from a family friend, from cheap, that they had some pieces that I have had in my studio or some objects that I've had in my studio for years, and is now in this context of so far removed from home. It's almost like I feel like proud of it in so many ways. I'm like, oh my gosh, it made it here. Yeah. But it's also still that friend from home. And yeah, so it's always, I'm like, I don't like the term like thinking of my work as children, even though I have a son figure in my work. But I didn't sell work for a long time because I was really attached. I feel like I'm a materialist in like the true sense, where all my memories live in objects and clothes and adornment, and that's why I often call these pieces like totems of memory. Because they hold so much memory for me, and so sometimes leaving them, it's like, oh, there's some memories out there in the world that I hope I don't forget because it's now so far away from me. But yeah, that's really profound. That's really great. Wow. But Suhan's amazing. Shout out Suhan. She just came to my studio a couple weeks ago. And yeah, amazing artist, professor, teacher, collaborator, writer. Yeah. You started with fiber. Yeah. And then you pivoted into performance. Yeah. Talk to me about that transition. I mean, it's not really a transition because you're still obviously doing the work, but you know, it's definitely an elevation and an extension of your background. How did that pivot and that continuation occur? Yeah, so I feel like I started with both fiber. Well, I feel like fiber was innate, and then also I started doing like a lot of like collage and digital collage when I was like a teenager. Okay, yeah. I'm 30, so I like kind of grew up like in like the MySpace like era where like, oh, I know how to do HTML and CSS to make like my MySpace profile cool. And so I learned like a very DIY like aesthetic of, and it wasn't necessarily even like purposely DIY. It was just because I wanted to make my like internet presence, social media presence on MySpace look cool. So I like, would go through these different cheap internet avenues of like making images. And then I still do a lot of digital collage as a form of like sketching. I feel like collage and fiber are kind of both like my little roots of making. But performance presented itself again with Suhan. But I felt like when I was in studio, you learn a lot about the work and just moving it around. So how heavy something is, how something might get really tangled with something else, like certain fibers just immediately are like attracted to one another and get really tangled, whereas some the exact opposite, they like repel each other depending on what it is. I also work with both natural and synthetic materials and plastic and man-made, and I like playing with all of it, but it's a way for me to learn about the work. I feel like when you get a new pair of shoes, while you love the shoes and maybe love the style, the saying is you don't know until you like walk a mile in those shoes and you're like, oh, maybe these shoes are so uncomfortable. Now I don't like them anymore. Yeah. It's the same thing with the work. Not that I'm going to dislike the work. I don't know what it is really until it's, been on my back for 4 hours in a performance, or I'm holding it in a certain way, making noise with it. That's when I really feel like, okay, this is what this thing is saying and sharing with me. And that's how performance kind of became this innate part of my practice as well, where everything that I make now is activated in some way by my body, whether that's putting it on my head and trying to balance it on my head, or wrapping it around me and laying in it, or when it's a piece hanging in a museum, pulling it and seeing how much weight I can lean back with it, and how it supports me in that way. Yeah. While it is performance, I also feel like I call my performances weaving dances. We're just dancing together. Yeah. And so everything that I make is my dance partner. Yeah.
You mentioned activation, and explain what to an audience who might not be familiar, what is the practice of activation in regards to your work and activating your work?
Yeah, I've said before that I don't consider anything I do necessarily static. It can sit still, but it's always, slowly moving, especially, again, with fiber. A little breeze can make it twinkle in so many, like Holly's piece in the show. Yeah. Like just moving by it, how delicate it is, but just moving by it, and the way our body moves air, it makes the whole piece twinkle and move slowly. So while it may be sitting still when no one goes by it, a little breeze or something,
a little push, a little tap, a little touch.
Yeah. It'll bring it to life. And so, gravity is both my best friend and enemy when it comes to like the balance of an object. It makes it so, I don't want to say difficult, but like, again, just a challenge. I kind of forgot what your question was.
No, totally fine. None of my questions mattered. Say whatever you want to say. But I guess, what does activating the work bring to the work?
Oh, yeah. I guess kind of just a little bit of what I've said about it having its own song, its own voice, its own agency. I feel like as I've grown over time and making and that's the most exciting thing about being a maker, is like I get to be a student to the material forever. I'm also get to be a student to language forever. I have said before that Diné, for me, I'll never be fluent because of how complex it is, and it's my mom's first language.
Oh, wow.
She doesn't know how to read or write it, but one day just hit me in my head. I was like, oh, it's okay if I never be fluent, because I still just get to learn my whole life about it. And it's like fluency isn't the goal. It's the learning is the goal and the gift. And with material, giving it the agency of what it wants to be or how it wants to grow, activating it is kind of allowing it to do exactly that. Yeah.
I don't want to take up too much more of your time, because I know you have to get to the city, and
I'm going to the city. I still have to pack my hotel room.
Oh my God.
So I'm good for a while.
Yeah. Tell people where they can find your art, find you, follow you. Where can people connect with you?
Yeah, all my I use Instagram a lot. Instagram has kind of just become like my portfolio in a lot of ways. Eric-Paul Riege, ERICPAUL RIEGE. It's kind of a collection of sketches and pieces and performances and inspirations, and from there, my website's few years old. I need to update that. But I have some really cool projects coming up in the next few years. I have 3 solo shows, and they're kind of all loosely. 2 of them are really connected. The first is kind of loosely connected, but they're going to be at Canal Projects in January in New York City, in the Bell Gallery at Brown in Rhode Island, and the Henry Gallery in Seattle. I'm working with Summer Guthrie on the New York City show, and Thea Kire Tagle and Nina Boziknik on the Henry and Brown show. And they're kind of all loosely inspired by my relationship in going to different museum archives in the past few years. My first was actually here at MAM with Laura Allen, and it was an experience that was confusing and beautiful and strange, and I had never experienced going into a collection like that. And then same thing with Brown. I went to the Hoffenreffer collection to look at different Diné objects, particularly weavings and jewelry. I had the same kind of weird feelings afterwards, and so the whole scope of the project is kind of my feelings. I don't necessarily have answers. Of course, questions lead to more questions, and so
they do. Yes, they do. Yes, they do.
So I am lucky enough that I'm getting to work with those collections and getting to kind of recreate and reimagine some of the weavings and jewelry pieces in my own style. So I'm excited to see how they continue to develop.
Yeah.
And
It's Thank you so much for performing, these past 2 days, sitting down with me. I'm so thrilled to get to chat with you, and thank you for, continuing to be a friend of the museum.
Yes, I know. It's been great. Part 202. Third time's going to be an even bigger charm.
Looking forward to see you.
Yeah. Thank you.
That was Maybe Actually Museums Are For Me. Thank you so much to Eric-Paul Riege for sitting down with me and chatting about the performance and your work in general. It's great to have you as a friend of the museum. Otherwise, you can find us in your feed next week, same time, same place. Whatever platform you found us on, that's where we'll be. And then, of course, the Montclair Art Museum itself is open Friday through Sunday. You can explore what exhibitions we have on view, our hours, where to buy tickets, special events, workshops, programming, all on our website. That's montclairartmuseum.org. And we will talk to you next week.